Hello, Belinda. How are you today?
I'm good.
What do you think we need to talk about, and what do you hear people talking about on social media? Where are some of their questions, and what subjects can we speak into?
I think faith is a big one, especially now with all that's happening in the world.
What's there to say about faith? Do you mean faith in the abstract? Particular faiths, so-called? Because I know I've spoken about interfaith conflict resolution. I've introduced the concept, but it could equally be called interreligious conflict resolution.
This is not about religion now. This is about a fact, is there a God?
Is there a God?
Yeah.
Well, some people will say yes, there is, and some will say no, there isn't. And there are traditions in the world that believe that God can be known to human reason. And I think God can be known by human reason, but if you're determined not to acknowledge the existence of God, I think you will find a way of rejecting any argument for the existence of God. I mean, like, there are 5 classical ways of proving God's existence that Thomas Aquinas came up with in the Middle Ages, for example. There are different arguments that different philosophers use for God's existence, but they don't seem to be convincing to everybody. They really grip you where you live, really.
Because it's not profound enough. I mean, it leaves a lot up to the imagination.
Yes.
God is not in your face. He's not in front of you, and that's the problem. And I think with most people, it's like this mystery character that's
because God seems to be invisible.
Yeah, He's invisible, completely invisible.
Mm.
But then you see Him working through, you see the influences of God working through life.
Do you?
I do anyway.
You do?
Yeah.
So
I'm a God believer.
Oh, you're a God believer.
But I know a lot of people have that question. Is there truly a God?
Okay, now...
Or is it something that man made up to keep other men in line? Or to give them hope?
Right. In other words,
life can get quite difficult.
Is God a creation of man?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Sigmund Freud suggested, like Karl Marx suggested too, when he said that religion is the opium of the people. And Freud suggested that God was some sort of big father figure that we projected into the sky.
Yeah.
And then other people go and they read holy books and they think, oh, this is just another version of the sky god that all the ancient cultures seem to have. But this sky god seems more powerful than the others. And he seems to like to put males in charge too. Do you know people that are agnostic and atheist, and they're not as convinced by what you call the signs of God in our life?
I know a few people.
Yeah, and they're not as convinced as you, let's say.
Yes, they don't see God working through their lives and through the lives of other people.
Right. Well, one approach is to say that so far we have talked about in these episodes looking for a pattern to life, a meaning to life, asking the question, is there a reason why things happen? Now, if at some level you didn't believe that there could be, might be, or there is, would you get up, brush your teeth, exercise, have breakfast, go to work, do whatever it is you do, and try to have rational interactions with human beings if you didn't believe that there was a purpose to something?
If you didn't believe there was a purpose, but not necessarily if you didn't believe there was a God.
Right.
Yeah.
But let's let me presume for the moment, and I don't know whether this is the case in every agnostic or atheist's life, but you would think that we have this life, and then after that we just are reduced to dust, and that's the end of our life.
That's pretty frightening.
And why does it necessarily follow that just pursue hedonistic pleasure, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow you die sort of idea? What's it all for? Now, some people say we don't care for philosophical speculation. So naturally, those of a philosophical bent may question whether it's utterly meaningless to live life with all its experiences, the heartache, the joys, the beauties, the horrors, and for it all to be for naught in the end, because your existence comes to an end and that's it. Those of a philosophical bent may question whether that makes sense at all. In fact, you've got historical examples like the man who became the Buddha, the Siddhartha, in ancient India, and his life was set up so that he wouldn't see any sadness or decay, and the dead flowers were plucked from the garden, and everything was just to be rosy and peachy within his purview. And then one day he walked out on the street and he saw a funeral procession.
A what?
A funeral procession. And he asked, "What's that? What's that man doing lying there?" And they explained that he was dead. And then he suddenly had to wrap his head around death. You know, disease, demise, death. The final things of life. And that was a watershed moment for him.
But see, a lot of people would say that's why they introduced God into the picture.
Well, that's why I'm giving you an example from...
Death is such a
foreign culture, right? And a culture an ancient India, Buddha, he was not yet the Buddha. He hadn't come upon his nirvana experience under the Bodhi tree. This was years and years before, but it set him on a philosophical quest. And that is, what's it all for if that's how we end up? Right, just burnt on a funeral pyre. So there are a lot of people in the world who are like Siddhartha. They are given to philosophical speculation. What's it all for? Why do I even wake up in the morning or do anything if that's the end of the story? So there must be something beyond. Maybe you could even argue that the fact that I do get up and I am motivated to live and make plans and build a future argues in favour that I don't believe that my actions in life here are for naught.
But we're talking about life here.
Yes.
While you're alive.
That's right.
Yeah.
That maybe this is the beginning of a big journey for me. Maybe this isn't the 70 years and 10 that a human has, or 50 years and 30. It doesn't matter. It still could be a blip on the radar of eternity. It might just be the tiniest tip of an iceberg, and life goes on, and there's something more, there's a beyond. And then there's the question of, what about all the things that are wrong and the injustices that we seem to see all around us?
Absolutely.
Is there an opportunity for things to be set right and for the injustices to be corrected? and for justice to obtain.
Why isn't that ever dealt with? If there is a God, a lot of people say that.
Whether there's so much that seems unexplained during our life.
Why does it have to be that way if there is a God?
Well, are we meant to know everything? We obviously don't.
I
There
think
seems to be a
knowing
curtain,
if
right,
there's-
like a curtain, that the human mind, look, I don't know who's going to win the Melbourne Cup. Maybe that's a good thing. If I knew I was going to win the Melbourne Cup, I'd get all my money and put it on that horse, and then who knows, I'd probably be turned into a ridiculous maniac by the winnings or by a series of winnings, and make choices and make expenditures that could possibly ruin my life because I don't know how to regulate my emotions and my addictive personality. So I'll take this lump of money and I can get as much as I want, but then I'll ruin my life because I'm a slave to all the passions that I have.
But you're talking about money there. I'm talking about God. How can that ruin your life?
Well, I got there by saying that there is a curtain around what we can know. There's a known and there's an unknown. So
what I have a bit of an issue with is the unknown, and I want to know.
But there's lots in
why
that
is there
basket.
an unknown?
There is an unknown because you know the meaning of everything that happens on planet Earth? Do you know why it seems to be that criminals seem to get off scot-free for things? Do you know why people have to suffer in the way they do? Why evil is permitted on this planet? There's lots that we don't know. And notwithstanding clairvoyance, they may be rare, a lot of them may be phony, but even if there is a genuine human clairvoyance, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. I don't know what's going to happen when I walk home from here. So the known is so tiny and it's surrounded by this ocean of the unknown. And yet, psychologists say that we do have, I'm thinking more like people in the Jungian school of psychology, which look for a relationship between the conscious and the unconscious. They say that there is an organic connection between the conscious, which deals with the known, and the unconscious, which is all about the unknown.
That comes out in your dream space, the unconscious.
Well, yes,
A lot of the time.
Jung said that there's a collective unconscious, which is a repository for archetypes and images that have been shared through time and with all types of humanity everywhere. So a patient who might be going through a psychosis or schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder may start drawing images that belong to an ancient religion. They may start drawing images that you could find on Egyptian temples or sculptures in China.
And people would call that reincarnation.
That's jumping to conclusions. All I'm saying is that Jung and others have noticed that deep in the human psyche, there's kind of like a pool of images and memories. And if you go deep enough, you start tapping those. It doesn't mean that you had to have lived in those places. It just means that you have access to those archetypes, right? So sometimes what's in the unconscious in terms of information can constellate into images and archetypes. When people look at the images on, let's say, a deck of a tarot deck or whatever, a lot of these are depictions of archetypes in the unconscious. Some people use them in therapy and so on. You know, what does this make you think? Now, so how did we get here? Oh yes, we're talking about that great ocean of unconsciousness of the unknown and that little island of the known, that little point of light which we call our consciousness, right? And even when something seems to break in from the unconscious, an archetype, a voice, it's coming into it's landing on that little island. It's coming into that small spot of illumination on the stage that we call consciousness. And we hear people say, well, God spoke to me. Maybe that gives people a conviction that there's a God. Because they have an experience. Some psychiatrists might explain it away as a hallucination or an auditory hallucination, a visual hallucination, but they have an experience, which is a very clear and vivid experience of something that seems more real than their reality, like hyper-reality. And part and parcel of this experience is that something is breaking in from outside. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's like, I could not have come up with this myself. Here I am living my mundane life, thinking my mundane, ordinary thoughts, and boom, something erupts and breaks into my consciousness that doesn't sound like me, doesn't think like me, and so on. It may be a voice, it may be an image, it may be a flow of ideas and information, and suddenly somebody wakes up and they are aware of a whole tradition they hadn't been aware of before. They may be able to open up books and read and understand arcane and esoteric books that they were never able to understand before. They may hear people's dreams and suddenly be able to interpret them as though they know that they've just been schooled in the language of dreams. You've seen that film, The Matrix, and you know, at one point Keanu Reeves has to be able to access information that's not in his normal consciousness, and they have a way of downloading packages of information. So if you need to fly a plane, they do a pilot download. If you need to defend yourself, they do a martial arts download, and the next thing you know, you're leaping around the place and doing these elaborate martial arts, or you've got the skill that you need to fly a helicopter or whatnot, ride a motorbike, without having to go through an arduous process of learning.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
And all of which reinforces this idea that, hey, this didn't come from within my limited circle of experience. I never learned that in primary school, secondary school, uni, or from my friends or from my family, but it has nevertheless presented itself. So it's natural to think that this has come from the unknown, a deeper part of life experience, mind, and it has poked itself in to my consciousness. And some people
had that experience.
think, oh, it's a UFO that's come. And but in the olden days, they didn't talk UFOs, they talked angels and demons. I don't want to stifle the inquiry by getting hung up on nomenclature. Is it this or is it that? Is it a chemical or is it a demon? Is it an angel? Is it a UFO? All I'm talking about is the experience, and many of the people who hopefully will end up listening to these episodes will say, yes, something similar happened to me. Something broke in from the unknown, from the unconscious. Has anything similar happened to you?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I believe in angels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was no way of accounting for it within the content of your life experience,
No.
of Belinda's life experience as you knew it.
I've been asleep and I've heard somebody talking in my ear and I've woken up.
Yes.
saying something pretty profound.
Okay. So these experiences can be significant markers for people. I think there was a psychologist called Stanislav Grof who talked about awakenings, spiritual emergencies. So some people wake up to a new chapter in life, to a new quality of consciousness, because the unconscious, at a point in time, erupts into consciousness, makes a connection, and starts divulging either waves of information or visual imagery or auditory imagery. And some of this stuff can be crazy and mad, and some of it can be genuinely inspirational. And you hear of people that, oh my God, I'm listening to, there's something coming from beyond, from some extraterrestrial intelligence. And the reason I choose that phrasing is because what's mundane and earthly, we could have got off the news, or I could have read it in that magazine, or I could have had a conversation, somebody could have told me their experience. But what I'm hearing now seems to be off the planet, right? So, and then they start writing, and they can fill books.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at the great musicians throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them said they were inspired by angels and stuff.
Yeah, Mozart and Beethoven and so on.
Absolutely, and I believe that. I truly believe it. Yeah.
That we have what is inspiration? It's drawing in from beyond that spirit, and some work, be it artistic or scientific, seems inspired.
Especially music though, because they can hear it before they even
Yes, well,
write it.
Beethoven was still composing when he was deaf. He used to have to put his ear on the floor to feel the vibrations of the piano. But he could still hear it in his auditory imagination. And it's a beautiful thing, inspiration. And some works have the marks of inspiration, and some seem to lack the hallmarks of inspiration. So I'm not talking about something that's outside of most people's experience. When you behold a work of art or a great invention, and it's breathtaking, and you know
rare.
that it's inspired. If you're a believer, you might say the hand of God's on that. Mm-hmm. So where does that come from? Today you've got people engaged in channeling and automatic writing in the New Age movement. In days gone by, you had prophets who were writing down God's messages for their people. The Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, and others, the Baha'is, they believe in their prophets that received communication from the Most High, whether we call them Yahweh or Allah or God the Father or Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrians. Where did Zarathustra get his ideas from? So something beyond the ordinary has broken into consciousness, and it demands one's attention, and it usually takes charge of one's life. One can't leave it alone. And therefore, these people that become vessels for inspiration, it just takes over their life, and other people
it's addictive.
register that there's inspiration, and they take notice, and they become a rallying point. We're all, I think everyone listening can think of people by whom they are inspired.
Yes. Right. It's a rare thing, very rare.
Yes. So are we getting any closer to talking about God?
I think so, because when you talk about that level of inspiration, It's got to come from a God source.
Well, God is a name for that, but God is able to communicate with us. Traditionally, communication happens through messengers.
Yes.
Called angeloi in Greek, angels. That's what an angel is, a messenger. But if one takes a modern psychological approach, there still has to be a medium and a means of communication. How does what is unconscious get through to consciousness? How does it communicate itself? Obviously, this unconsciousness is not just a sea of void, of emptiness, of darkness, an ocean with no life. No, it's an ocean teeming with life and dynamism. There are marine creatures, there are creatures of every order living in there. I've already limited your imagination by using marine imagery, but we could just as well use aerial imagery, like every type of bird is flying in this space. You know, we're under a dome or an enclosed space, and then there's a space beyond. And it's got its ways of reaching us. And I suppose, part of this, making this transition, crossing this watershed from being in the camp that think that life has no meaning, it's haphazard, random, accidental, and the camp of believing that life has a meaning, is whether there's been some communication between the unconscious and the conscious, right? That convinces that person, it convinces them, because as I say, I can't find the roots of this in my ordinary experience. There's something beyond. There's something, this has definitely come from outside of me. And they don't really question it. They don't say, oh, maybe I'm hallucinating. Well, sometimes they do, but they keep coming back and realizing that that's a bedrock reality that they base their life on.